Well, thank you for that warm introduction. I'd like to thank Jeff and the organising committee for this invitation, and I'd like to thank EasyJet for once bringing me here on time. Perhaps I should thank the Lord for that miracle. Actually, I have spent some years in Asia as well as Africa doing my PhD in India in agricultural economics. As you heard, I'm a humble economist, if that's not a contradiction in terms. What I will say rests on two assumptions. One is that biblical law is about righteousness, and that it is a great and glorious law, as it says in Isaiah, and it is how God teaches humanity how to create a relational society. A relational God teaches us how to create a relational society. And the second assumption is that the key to the interpretation and application of biblical law is found in a saying of Jesus. When he's asked which is the greatest commandment, you remember he says, love God and love your neighbour. On these two laws hangs all the law and the prophets. And love is a quality of relationships, as you've heard already this afternoon. We've just heard what love means, I think, in the ordering of the public square from what I thought was a magisterial input from Oz. I was taking notes on everything he said. Thank you, Oz, it was terrific. So, I have a very quick run over of what I see as the key problems in Europe and why I think Christians can develop a strategy of hope. The outlines are on the table if you want to grab one and look at them, because there will not be time to connect all the dots, as they say. I'm going to present you with a number of propositions. Where you disagree, please argue with me later. I would love to hear from you. But we have some huge challenges in Europe, and I think as Christians we have a unique responsibility and opportunity to address those problems, as we were also hearing from Oz Guinness a few minutes ago. So here are my 7 key problems as I see them. I haven't mentioned the immigration quotes threat, but here are my 7. Firstly, as Oz Guinness said, there is a huge challenge because Angela Merkel, David Cameron, other European leaders are saying multiculturalism is dead. But in saying multiculturalism is dead, they are creating a very dangerous vacuum and are putting nothing into its place. These are dangerous times for Europe when we have no shared vision of where we're going. Secondly, we are threatened by political apathy. Individualism is breeding a non-engagement, both politically and economically. And democracy can survive almost anything except non-engagement. If people won't vote, then is the government legitimate? The last governments in Britain have been elected with a 40% turnout. Is that enough to make a government legitimate? Supposing it goes down to 30%, and then down to 20%. If only 20% of people vote, is that enough to make a government legitimate? Thirdly, debt. Proverbs 22 verse 7 says the borrower is the slave of the lender. And whether you look in the Old Testament or the New Testament, we are warned repeatedly against debt. And yet I fear as evangelical Christians in the last 60 years, we have simply failed to address the issue of debt adequately. We've just been silent and watched the debt accumulate. So whose slave are we becoming in Europe? And can we survive as a vibrant economic community if we sink more deeply into debt? as individuals, as households and families, as corporations, ultimately as nations, as we get more and more into debt, we go on the slow growth economic track, will we survive against nations that are not so much in debt and can grow much quicker than us? Fourthly, we lack accountability of our corporate leaders. I could give you many examples. Take BP and what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. At the very time that the Gulf spill happened, in the 2 weeks following, in Washington, D.C., BP got permission to do deep-sea drilling in the Arctic, under the ice. Where is corporate accountability? Who can hold a corporate like BP, which is bigger than many economies of whole countries? Who can hold the leadership of BP accountable? Who can prevent it walking over our planet the way it does? Or think about the pay differentials. What does equality mean, which we say we believe in Europe, when one person is paid 10 times more than another person? 10 times? 100 times more than another person. Indeed, taking into account the share options and everything else, it goes towards 1,000 times more than another person. Here is the person running one of our big supermarkets in Britain, and he's paid 500 times more for every hour he works than the girl on the checkout. Can that possibly be matched with equality? What does it mean to say we believe in equality and pay people those sorts of pay differentials? Or fifthly, our competitive status. In Europe, I've talked about some of the problems due to debt, but there's another direction of problem coming from what I call our high overheads. If we allow families to break down, then how do we pay for all the care that is required for old people? We rely on, of course, the government. Who provides for the children who go adrift from the context of one parent or non-caring or engaged parents? Again, we look to the state. We're generating a whole generation of people who are subject to depression and mental illness because of their family breakdown. 1 in 12 people now in Britain is on antidepressants. How are we going to pay for the support of these people? Family disintegration has huge human costs, but it also creates economic costs that make us unviable. This is not very cheerful, is it? My 6th problem is our low birth rate. Now, politicians tend not to worry about the low birth rate because it doesn't really impact in 5 years. But a number of European countries, Spain, Italy, Germany, and so on, have a number of children per adult woman of 1.3 or less. It's the same problem in Singapore, Hong Kong, and parts of the Far East as well. But these European countries are losing roughly 1/3 of their population every 30 years, or every 35 years, depending on exactly what the ratio is. Imagine that 1/3 of the entire German population will be gone in 35 years from now. Now, you can import people to fill those gaps, but what is left of European culture if we go on in that direction for 60 or 70 years? Why are we not having children? Why do we not want children? What is it at the heart of our European culture that is saying we don't want to have children? Some people, of course, tragically cannot have children. And 7thly, in my list, I've put across politics, business life, and family life, people are declining to take responsibility. Let me just give you one example of that. Probably most of us in this room have pensions. With our pension, we sit at home, we put our feet on the desk, as it were, and we say to the pension fund where we put our money, give me more, or just give me, just pay me. All I want is money from you. I don't want to be engaged. I don't want to be involved. I don't want to know where you put my money. Put it in pornographic websites. Put it wherever you like. Just give me a good return on my capital. We want reward without responsibility. We want investment without involvement. We want profit without participation. My friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ, this is an unsustainable situation. It goes straight against the parable of the talents, where Jesus says to the man who puts his money in the bank to get it with interest, he says, this is a sign of a hard person who reaps where he doesn't sow. We've adopted the mindset from the world without questioning it, that we can reap where we haven't sown. We can sit at home, put our money into pension funds and expect to get it back with 4%, 6%, 8% growth, doing nothing for it. So, let me move on to the good news. Where can hope be found? How can we change these things? What is it feasible for us to do? It overlaps a little bit again with what Osgenis was saying. So firstly, I think we've got to challenge the dead end of postmodernism, of individualism, by arguing much more cogently for what I call relationism or relational thinking, which you heard about earlier, the idea that relationships are the key to our well-being and our identity. This is not rocket science, and it chimes with what everybody knows in their hearts is true. If I ask you in the room here, what's the most important thing in your life, and you say, my car, even if your car is a Porsche, then I think you've got a serious problem. Everybody actually finds what is most important and significant to them in their relationships. And we've somehow got to communicate that in the public square. It's time to move on from postmodernism. Postmodernism, I think, is dead. Secondly, we need a new European Charter of Relational Values. So I would want to say to all of you assembled here, and in particular to the organisers, isn't this time for Christians to come up with a European Charter of Relational Values? We've heard about the 5 core values, although we haven't traced them back to their relational roots, perhaps, in our own thinking enough. But can I suggest that this is something the organisers need to do before Hope 3, come up with a charter of relational values, which incorporates a lot of the things that Oz was saying. Thirdly, I think as Christians we've got to argue for, vote for, work for, and practice ourselves in our personal lives. Jesus talked about practicing and teaching the law. We've got to argue for a debt-free Europe. And I think to achieve a debt-free Europe, we have to go for 3 things. One is a range of new financial products. In Relationships Global, which I work for in the UK, we're currently working with some friends on shared equity arrangements for house purchase to replace bank mortgages. It's perfectly feasible, but it takes the person who is using that money or lending that money out of a debt context. Secondly, we've got to take a lead from Germany's commitments to achieve a balanced budget. If Germany can do it, all of us should be able to do it. But I think we've got to go beyond Germany, and we've got to argue with our politicians not just to balance the budget, but to repay the debts that we've accumulated. And thirdly, I think there has got to be brought into economic thinking in Europe the idea of the Jubilee from the Old Testament, a periodic, systematic point of debt write-off. We have got to be willing to write off debts. Let us set the date of 2030 or even 2050. But let us move towards a point where we say all the debts at this moment, let's say 2050, are going to be written off. Because there has to be a moment of debt write-off if ever we're going to really recover our economic freedoms. Because without debt write-off, we will not have freedom. Fourthly, I think we need a new corporate governance code in Europe which requires companies to report annually on the state of their stakeholder relationships. Stakeholders are employees, they are suppliers and customers and shareholders as well. Now you might say that's hopeless, but let me tell you it's happening now in South Africa. They have a corporate governance code called King 3, which you can find on the web, and we're involved with 4 major listed companies at the moment in South Africa, helping them learn how to report on the quality of their relationships in their annual report and accounts. It's supported by the Institute of Directors, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. If we can do it in South Africa, why can't we do it in Europe? That will give a chance then for employees to say what they think about the pay differentials that they have in the companies where they work. Fifthly, we have to rebuild our extended families. The biblical term for family is not the nuclear family of mother, father, and 2 children. It is an extended family concept, and it is possible to rebuild extended families in Europe, and I think we must do it if we are going to have a humanizing foundation in Europe. I think I don't have the time to give you lots of examples of how that could be done, but they are on the websites at the bottom of those sheets. But it is feasible.
Night you'll be talking more about.
I will try and talk more and give you some examples tomorrow night. Number 6, I'm suggesting that to take the relational idea into corporations, we must also take it into schools and hospitals and universities and every public body. All public agencies that deliver services to the public should be rated not just on their financial performance or their technical performance, but on their relational performance. Relationality is not just about what happens in our personal relationships. I think that was the mistake of personalism, where it just took a wrong turn in the road, although the ideas were so important and valuable. Relationships are key between organizations, between big companies and small companies, for example, between university faculty and their students, between clinicians and management in hospitals. These relationships are between professional groups, between organizations, across the board. Every part of our public life is characterized by relationships. All of those relationships need to be under scrutiny and need to be reported on and become a major priority of our public thinking. And finally, I think we need a redefinition of our national goals and achievements in relational terms, in terms of social sustainability rather than just economic growth. Now, of course, economics are important. Money, financial transactions are always an expression of an underlying relationship. And if you study financial transactions, you will learn an enormous amount about the way that relationships are happening. But relationships are more than money, and they need to be assessed not just at an institutional level, but at a national level, and that would include a national annual assessment of what is happening in the relationships among the nations of Europe. It seems to me extraordinary that Europe can exist as a community of nations without any formal process or annual review of what is going on in the relationships among their members. Why are we not discussing each year as a community what is happening in the relationships among ourselves in order to deal with the problems that we have? So here's my 7-point agenda to transform Europe. Now, you may have a different 7 points than me, but what I'm suggesting, I suppose, to my friend Jeff Fountain and the organisers of the conference is this: that if we are really serious about transforming Europe, what we need to do as a community of Christians is to decide what our agenda of priorities is, on the basis of our biblical understanding. We need to appoint working groups who are going to look at practical strategies to achieve those changes. And then we need to come together again in due course and agree on a set of changes that we want to present to political leaders. Now, that may already be happening, but if it isn't, let me commend it to Jeff and his team to think about. Thank you.